welcome to our session on ownership structures and firm strategies. We have 3 presentations today. I'm looking very much forward to listening to you. As we're only 3 presentations instead of 4, you can take up to 30 minutes approximately if you would like to. I would say, yeah, if you could concerning questions during the presentations, I don't know how would you like to keep, or basically just decide by yourself how you would like to keep that. Otherwise, I will just stay in the background and be back with some questions after the presentations are done. So the first presentation today is entitled "Drivers of Cross-Border Merger and Acquisition Transitions in the Upstream Oil and Gas Industry." Our second presentation is going to focus on the question, who refines and why, while the third presentation is going to focus on going downstream, an economical option for oil and gas exporting countries. So that being said, I'm now very happy to move to the first presentation by Sevkat Ozgur. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me first share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, so perfect. So thank you very much. Once more, good morning to everyone. So here is Sevkat from University of Vienna. I'm doing my PhD studies at the former chair of Industry, Energy and Environment. And today I will be presenting our working paper together with my co-author, Franz Wirl. So basically, since last year, there was a slightly change in the paper. So new abstract is loaded also in the platform. So the paper is about upstream oil and gas mergers and acquisitions, but we analyze now the domestic transactions in the US. So let me briefly give you an outline of the paper. So oil and gas industry is a very dynamic and technology-driven industry, as well as it struggles with its continuous volatility of oil and gas prices. And the investments in the industry, especially mergers and acquisition investments, have an essential impact on the global economy. And for a firm, especially in the oil and gas industry, upstream investments are crucial because it's directly related to the replacements of reserves, field recovery, and all these are considered as key factors for future growth. So, however, attempts to explain those investments and its underlying motivation or the unique drivers face a challenge due to the complexity of the industry, and as well as the interaction of various factors like supply balance, demand, changing markets, events, financial crisis. All these are having an impact on also mergers and acquisitions. So there is a broad literature about mergers and acquisition and interdisciplinary research. However, academic studies directly focusing on extracting industry or oil and gas industry is still growing, and the results are not conclusive. So this is one of our motivation for this working paper, that we would like to provide a broader view on mergers and acquisition transaction in the oil and gas industry, for instance, for upstream industry, and its motivating facts by adding previous theoretical approach and industry-specific perspectives. So as said at the beginning, we analyzed the US case and we look for the drivers of US oil and gas mergers and acquisition and its domestic transaction in the upstream industry. So when we look for the development of upstream transaction in the last recent years in oil and gas M&A market, light blue sides are showing the deal counts based on mergers and acquisition transaction based on deal counts. And we could see that there is an increasing trend for upstream transactions. So the changing market conditions and especially technological advancements and pressure for capital discipline are some of the factors which triggers the M&A activity in upstream industry in the last recent years. So the US is in the epicenter of mergers and acquisition market, for instance, for oil and gas mergers and acquisition market. And in the recent years, what we see in the US is that there is an increasing domestic M&A transactions. So our first motivation is to question what drives oil and gas mergers and acquisition in general, and which specific factors motivates upstream oil and gas M&As. When we look at the background of M&A studies, we see that the transactions are generally impacted by technological, regulatory, economical, and industrial changes or other shocks. However, there is a literature about M&A in the oil and gas industry that the motives and underlying facts actually can change and differ across other countries. As said that there is a various elements which are interacting in the oil and gas industry, and all these make M&A strategy and the behavior of M&A decision changing over years. And overall, oil and gas M&A transactions are in the literature defined as the driven by industry-specific indicators, sectoral changes, and political events. However, there is the conclusion and the findings are inconclusive yet, and heterogeneous empirical evidence is there. Therefore, in this study, we are encouraged to further empirical demonstration from the case of US oil and gas market. So we have a 3 paper that we take as a base and focus on to replicate and contribute by our additional empirical approach. So first paper from Ghoddusi et al, and they look for the relationship between mergers and acquisition deal counts between 2004 and 2013 in the US domestic market. And they see that the most significant impacts come from industry-specific indicators such as oil and gas production growth and oil price, and they find no significant impact of capital market or stock market performance on mergers and acquisition deals. Second paper is from Canadian oil and gas transaction case between 1990 and 2008, and they are looking also the industry-specific indicators and their association with the takeover value. And the result shows that low reserve measures are associated with high takeover value, and oil price is shown to cause more takeover activity. At the same time, takeovers shown to cause changes on natural gas prices in Canadian oil and gas industry. And the third paper is again a case of US, and they look for between 1990 and 2018, also for the takeover activities in the domestic market of US, and they are looking for the impact of energy reserves and oil and gas prices, and what is the impact of takeover activity announcement on the returns. So there is a positive association between oil reserves and oil price, and negative association on companies' return after the announcements of takeovers. So our intended contribution is to look for the association between US upstream M&A transaction in terms of deal counts and value from the sector-specific macroeconomics, political, and technological changes perspective. We add further sub-analysis for various patterns of upstream transaction, such as that we filter for asset versus corporate deals and conventional and unconventional deals in the US. How we do it is here is the methodology and the data. So we have access to data from upstream oil and gas M&A transaction in the US from IHS market. So we extend the period of Ghoddusi et al. So we have an almost 2 decades data set, and we take different types of acquisitions and mergers. So we add acquisitions, farming, and acquisitions joint ventures into our analysis, that different than the traditional definition of acquisition and mergers, because we expect that there will be also driven changes based on different deal types. So our sample covers across 11 different regions in the US. Our sample size is about more than 4,000 deals. And we apply for a deal count model, pulsar regression analysis with fixed effect regressions. So here you can see the demonstration of that, which independent variables we take into account. So basically oil and gas production growth, oil and gas natural prices. We take S&P 500 index as a stock market indicator and interest rate spreads as a capital market indicator. We add two dummy variables to see the impact of shale revolutions and Trump's election and the administration in the US. So dependent variables is based on M&A deal counts at that level, and we look for per aggregated region level per year. And additionally, we add some sub-analysis for each regression model that we look for how upstream M&A activity also reacts to the changes of the independent variables, which means that we apply for order on the timing and we apply for 1 year lagged independent variables in the model. When we look at the results, first of all, what we see is that in the US over the last 2 decades, based on our data sample, we see that more concerns on gaining asset ownership, asset reallocation, and combinations because our data set includes much more M&A asset deal counts than corporate deal counts. What happened in the US when we look at the last 2 decades, that we could see that global politics and high technology intensive industry in the US, introduction of the new drilling techniques and the discovery of the new resources like shale oil and gas also impacted upstream transaction in domestic market in the US. So organic growth for oil and gas companies is much more expensive than the mergers and acquisition strategy. Therefore, M&A is still commonly applied in the market. So we are looking for that basically also, instead of looking for which underlying drivers, also to see the specific impact of shale revolution or Trump's administration. So how are independent variables over years, over the last 2 decades behave, and what is their association with the M&A activity? We could see that at the first decade, oil and gas prices has a rapid increase, and this is similar patterns with the M&A activity. However, for the second decade, it's much more volatile. And for the oil and gas production growth, this is a crucial point. What we see is that for the first decade in domestic market, negative oil and gas production growth is there. And however, after 2009, there is a strong change. So as mentioned, we also look for the difference between conventional and unconventional. So basically after shale revolution, we see much more deals, transactions in also unconventional segment of the upstream industry. So between 11 regions, we don't have a homogeneous distribution of the deals. We see more in the mid-continent, Rocky Mountains, and the North regions, increasing unconventional investments over the years. So here I didn't bring today the results of the graphs, but if somebody would be interested, I have some backup slides we could also discuss, but I would like to briefly summarize what are the empirical evidence of our analysis. So when we look for the M&A deal counts dependent variable, what we find is that negative and statistical significant association with the interest rate spreads and oil and gas production growth. Positive and statistically significant association with oil price, but no significant impact of natural gas prices. We find also no significant impact of stock market indicator, S&P 500 index. And when we look for the 1 year lagged case, is that we can see the impact of shale revolution or Trump's administration in the lag determinants with 1 year. But otherwise, we don't see a significant impact of shale revolution or Trump's administration. In the second case, when we look for asset deals or corporate deals, our results are very similar with the M&A deal count analysis in overall analysis in the first one. However, for the corporate deals, we find almost no significant association between our independent variables and M&A deal costs, except the negative impact of Trump administration. When we look for the case of conventional deals and unconventional deals, for the conventional deals, we also find negative and significant relationship between M&A deal counts and interest rate spreads, oil production growth and shale revolution, and positive and significant impact of oil and gas prices. For the unconventional deals, the most crucial is that Trump's incentives for unconventional oil and gas industry in the US. So we see a positive impact and significant impacts of Trump's administration. However, we don't find we find negative and significant association with oil and gas production growth for the unconventional deals, and positive and significant impact of oil price, and negative impact of natural gas prices. So as at the beginning mentioned, that we aim also look for the M&A deal value and repeat the same analysis. However, we have a limitation of the data availability at the moment, but we are working on the data merge that we could also repeat the same analysis for the M&A deal count. So what is our current conclusion is that it seems like upstream M&A transaction requires definitely a broader perspective than common traditional economic explanation. We offer a specific sector focus and unique contribution to the M&A literature. It is an extension of study Hussein Moghaddam. We have some contradictory findings for the last 2 decades because our period is extended period of Hussein Moghaddam, and also some similar findings with their paper. We believe that it's a timely research question, and it's important for the future directions of the transaction in the oil and gas upstream. So we could say that there is a stronger association between M&A activity and industry-specific indicators and macroeconomic indicators in the US. However, overall politics or technological or industry-specific changes has a limited effect. On the other hand, when we think of the Trump's case, is that time frame that what we have is limited, and the real impact should be tested for a conclusive arguments. And shale revolution unexpectedly has no significant impact except for corporate and conventional deals. And the surprising one of the results comparing to Hussein et al. Is that asymmetric response to the oil and gas production growth rate in the US, because we find that for the overall period, a negative relationship. What would be our future work from now on is that, first of all, this is still a preliminary working paper. So the current results only give first insights into various patterns, but we would like to investigate further that what other influencing factors could be there. So we would like to also look for robustness checked and independent variables. We think that what could be there additionally added, like upstream cost, drilling activity, or other macroeconomic factors, other stock market indexes could be added or not. So we are also planning to not just 1 year on timing, so for the lag determinants, but various time lag to see the impact. So we also apply, but the results are not yet there, for structural break tests to see the significant change before and after shale revolution. As mentioned, that we work on the extension of the sample for the case of mergers and acquisition deal value. And also maybe it could be an important contribution to look more deep into firm level behaviors of our sample and the conditions depending on specific regions. And we also believe that it's important to consider the current situation with the COVID pandemic, and post-COVID pandemic analysis could be important. And also we would like to, for the future policy implication, consider all climate change uncertainties in the oil and gas industry arguments and add them as an economic explanation to the paper. Thank you very much. So that would be it from my side. I'm open to any question.
Sevkat, thank you so much for the interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Do we have questions from the audience?
We have a question from Quentin Hoarau. I'm gonna let him ask it itself.
Okay, thank you. It's just that, Sevkat, I've been wondering, a very naive question, which is how much time, do you need to achieve a merger or an acquisition? I mean, this is related to your discussion on lagged variables. Meaning, I mean, would you say, it's discussions that between two firms that takes 1 year, 2 years, or more? I mean, is my question understandable?
I couldn't understand really. So could you repeat, please?
Yeah, I mean, an MAA should be preceded by discussions between firms.
Yes.
How much time do you think these discussions last?
Okay, so it really depends. So I have also a bit of sector experience in the oil and gas industry, and also worked related departments with the strategy and oil and gas mergers and acquisitions. So it highly depends actually the company's strategy. But in the domestic market, it's basically when we think of big oil and gas firms and the small and mid-sized firm, I would say that it's crucial impact of the changes and the trends in global and for the domestic oil and gas industry. So let's say that when there is the high volatility of oil and gas prices or certain events, which is directly impacting the oil and gas industry, for the mid-size and small-size firms, it's a big struggle to go through this. But then we see that there is always an increasing mergers and acquisition activity after such a crisis or such a certain events.
Okay, but so actually, I think in economic terms, I didn't understand what if there were more incentives to merge when prices were low or when prices were high.
I mean, what we see is that in the first decade, for example, in the US case, we see a hike on oil and gas prices, and we observe much more mergers and acquisition transactions.
Yeah, I mean, this is simultaneous, but if the decision of achieving an M&A takes a long time, then it's not, no? I mean, maybe the M&A is decided 1 or 2 years before it goes into your data, and during this time, prices have increased.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think it's possible?
I would say that for like US market, it's a specific case because we see a much more aggressive mergers and transactions than anywhere when we look at the global data. But in overall, I would say that oil and gas prices oil price has definitely a positive impact on the decision of mergers and acquisitions and the current situation. So if the prices are on hike, if increasing, then you would expect much more mergers and acquisition transactions.
Okay, because I mean, you could think the other way also. I mean, if price are low, then it weakens companies. And
yes, because then for the big oil and gas firms, even though the prices are decreasing, they have a much more strong financial conditions and situation that then they are also then aggressively acquiring the ones who are struggling financially with the situation. So the mid-size and small firms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think.
And I would say that what we also even see in the data, but this is not in the part of paper yet, but I could observe it in the US case in the paper, is that this shale revolution impact is not really there, maybe in my data set, but it is actually there when we look for the acquisition which were done by region, because the technology was there and it was developing. So all these leasing contracts for the asset deals were already done in advance, that you could start producing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have another question from Mr. Moncada, so please go ahead.
Exactly.
Good morning, everyone. Sevkat, thank you for the presentation. I think it was very interesting. My question is related to slide number 11.
11?
Yeah.
Yes.
So in the first part, you mentioned that gas prices has no impact on the DL count.
Yes.
But when you zoom in and look to the conventional versus conventional, then gas prices has an impact. Why is that? Do you have an explanation of that observation?
You mean that for the M&A deal count analysis, we don't see the impact, strong impact of significant impact of natural gas prices, but in the case of conventional, we see this. Do you mean this difference? Because the positive impact of oil price is always there.
But in the first one, in the row above, it's only oil prices.
Yes, exactly, and no significant impact of natural gas price. But in the case of conventional, we see it. So I'm working on it to really interpret the results and to figure out that why we have it in the conventional case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, also one possible answer is that because in the case of US, natural gas is byproduct of the oil. So it's highly correlated to the WTI prices.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for the comment.
Maybe I would have another question.
Yes, please.
Again, thanks for the presentation. You already highlighted this point a little bit, but I would like to go a little deeper. So is that it's very surprising that we don't find an effect of the shale oil revolution. So you already mentioned it could be connected to the data that you've gathered, but which other reasons could you see? Why is it the case that the shale oil revolution is not significant in your analysis?
It's a very surprising findings. That's why we also now applying the structural breaks to see how it would behave if we look for the significant impact on the data with shale revolution before and after. But I would say that when a little bit, because this analysis is not the deal level, so I don't look for each single deal in the summer, but of course, in time during working on this paper, I look for it. And what we could see is that, as mentioned, that actually the acquisitions and mergers already started before shale revolution in advance, with all this acquiring those assets and fields, all these leasing contracts. So if they're limited with 2009 or 2011, I don't see it really. But it actually already before in advance.
Okay, thank you so much for
clarifying. So therefore, I think there is like still a room to improve, and we have to a little bit cover deep the what data really tells us in the US case from this deal level data.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying.
Thank you very much.
And I have one more comment.
Yes.
If it is fine.
Yes, please.
Well, I see that you got the data from IHS Markit, and you see that last year they merged with S&P Global Platts. So yes, maybe it's good that you mentioned this in your paper, and I don't know if you have time to consider this.
Definitely good point. Thank you very much.
Okay, if there are no further remarks, questions, or anything. Once again, thank you, Sevkat, for the very interesting presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So
especially thank you for being the first one to open at this very early slot.
Thank you. So I will then stop sharing my screen for the
that would
next speaker.
Great.
Thank you very much.
So thank you again, Sevkat. That being said, so coming from the upstream sector, we now go all the way to downstream. Our second presentation is by Hussein Moghaddam from the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. And so, yes, Hussein, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to your presentation.
I don't see my camera. Let me stop one more time. Okay, and now.
Yes, now camera is working. The share is working too. Great.
It's working? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So one more time, good morning, everyone. My name is Hussein Moghaddam. I'm honored to participate in the first IAEE online conference. And on behalf of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, I would like also to thank the organizers for hosting this online event. The topic of my presentation for today is going downstream, an economical option for oil and gas exporting countries. Because also I have studied in the University of Vienna and I got my PhD there. This paper is done actually after my PhD under the supervision of Professor Franz and Dr. Ghoddusi, Assistant Professor of Finance, California Polytechnic State University. I try to make it short. However, if any of you are interested, the last version of the paper is online and available for download. Also feel free to contact me if there is any question. Well, I have divided my presentation into two main parts. First, very brief, I would like to talk about the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, who we are and what we are representing. Then in the second part, which is the main part of the presentation today, I will talk about this article and the objective of that. I'll discuss why resource exporting countries may go downstream, and we check these explanations against empirical facts. This topic is high on the political agenda of many resource exporting countries, mostly in the Middle East and North African countries, since refining and processing sectors have the potential to generate profit, stimulate employment, and promote human capital development. Very brief about the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, or GCF. For the time being, we are an intergovernmental organization of 19 countries with 11 members and 8 observers spanning 4 continents. Jointly, GCF member countries globally control 70% of the proven gas reserves, 42% of gas production, 52% of pipeline gas exports, and 51% of LNG exports. The headquarters of the forum is located in Doha, Qatar. I'm connecting from here now. Our objective is to promote natural gas as the fuel of choice in the global energy mix as an environmentally friendly source of energy. And our mission is centered on fostering cooperation and dialogue among producers, between producers and consumers, between governments and energy and environmental related industries. With this, what I'd like to present to you today is to discuss why resource exporting countries may and do go downstream. From the perspective of a resource exporting country, it seems very tempting to export final products like petrochemical products or gasoline instead of raw materials like crude oil or natural gas. This topic, as I said, is always on a debate in many oil and gas exporters like OPEC and GCF countries, as the refining sectors have the potential to generate profit, stimulate employment, and promote human capital development. Here we have some of the potential justifications for going downstream or going down the value chain, which account for normative as well as positive arguments that I will present briefly in this presentation. The topic of this paper is potentially related to the pieces of literature in natural resource economics, industrial organization, and development economics. A full review of literature in this area is beyond the scope of this study. However, we have provided a selective review of the most relevant papers inside the article. Also, some insights on the topic that resource revenue may hinder sustainable growth have provided. Most of this literature have political rather than economic arguments, and we have a short section about that in the paper as well. In general, I should say that a few papers in the literature focus on the performance of commercial and national oil companies. For example, Norton studies the impact of vertical integration on the systematic risk for refinery companies and finds a significant impact from vertical integration. On the profitability of oil companies from vertical integration, Levin found no significant impact, but he argues that there is a small effect on risk reduction. The threat of peak oil demand and accordingly shift to refined products is driving refiners to the petrochemical sector. Growing demand for petrochemicals is offering additional business opportunities for oil and gas exporting countries. However, as you can see from this figure, there is still excess refining capacity globally, and domestic capacities exceed demand in many countries. Therefore, the export markets for refined products are contested. And according to the literature, some literatures, refiners in industrial organizations, in particular in the US, are efficient because the market is competitive. The relative position in terms of downstream activities, and in particular the petrochemical industry for some oil exporting countries, even is more pronounced than for refining. For example, SABIC, Saudi Arabian Petrochemical Company, last produced over 60 million tons of chemical production, and is the world's largest chemical company. Well, in this section, I'm going to explain all explanations of domestic policy integrations that are based on economic efficiency. One way to address the economic efficiency of integrating downstream activities is to investigate how far business, unconstrained by political and social concerns, and manage the integration. For example, the major international companies, the Seven Sisters, faced a few political constraints and were vertically integrated along the entire supply chain, from the oil field to the gasoline stations. And OPEC changed that in the 70s by disaggregating the downstream from the upstream by independent refiners, and accordingly by diminishing the power of the Seven Sisters. Regarding industrial organizations, well, vertical integration can offer substantial gains. This hypothesis seems to be vindicated by the history of the oil industry until the 70s, as we have seen by the Seven Sisters. The first explanation of vertical integration is the existence of technical economies of scope between upstream and downstream activities. There are various reasons in the industrial organization literature for that, such as transport costs, technical aspects, coordination, and other technical synergies between extracting, refining, and related industries. The second reason is that integration can avoid double marginalization caused by non-competitive firms as a result of the downstream, upstream, and downstream activities. We also can have an additional explanation of integration related to the optimal boundaries of a firm. Here we have two competing and partial overlapping theories: the theory of transaction costs and the theory of property rights. I don't go to the details of these two theories, just the transaction cost theory argues that market transactions can be costly due to several reasons, like the potential opportunities behavior of contract partners. Therefore, they said that integration of activities with high transaction costs within a firm can be efficient. The theory of property rights asks, what is the benefit of owning a property? The answer is property rights allow the owner to determine all those issues that are not specified by contracts, and indeed the owners can fill the contractual gaps according to their own needs. However, which of these theories justifies integration? The empirically established indication is that integrated firms should be characterized by a higher profitability after adjusting for the opportunity cost of the inputs, which is crude oil or natural gas, because the oil rent is independent of the gains or losses from integration, and is just showing the production, the benefits that brings to the GDP of the countries. Next is comparative advantage. Given the importance of international and free trade, production takes place at the location which delivers the final products to consumers at the lowest total cost. Therefore, here the transport cost can be crucial. What we discuss is a successful domestic downstream industry requires advantages. As you can see from this figure, for instance, the UK and Norway's resources are offshore, and therefore the production costs of oil and gas are much higher than in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq, with them that they have onshore fields. So we see another advantage for some OPEC members here to go downstream. Regarding development, from a normative perspective, export revenues can be used to foster domestic development. Development may result from investment into education and from investment into industries with comparative advantages. Therefore, another important objective of going downstream is to serve additional development goals, like providing jobs and career opportunities to the local market. For spillovers, going downstream provides an opportunity for countries to invest into the education system, as I said, which also will lead to spillovers. Well, a large body of literature emphasizes the importance of spillovers from knowledge, capital, infrastructure, and other public goods on economic development, since downstream industries require skilled labor, like engineers. Going downstream could provide opportunities and incentives for the countries to invest in education and human capital. However, I should note that this policy can face a crucial and expensive transition phase if a skilled labor is not available domestically, which is the case of Qatar or Emirates, so that it becomes necessary for the country to hire expats, and this could be costly and delivers little or no local benefits for the countries. In general, the hedging argument applies to all downstream industries in which profit margins are negatively correlated or uncorrelated with oil price. Some literature found that refiners offer a hedge because low fuel prices reduce demand for refined products, and therefore will be reduced the margins that's supposed to be earned. Also, in another paper, Ghoddusi and Wirl demonstrate that this argument applies even when there is no negative correlation. So if an upstream firm faces substantial volatility in its core business, then going downstream can serve as a hedge against vagaries in the country's upstream profit. Our last normative argument for entering into downstream or carbon-intensive industries depends on two premises. First, climate change will pose a serious constraint on worldwide economic activities. And second, carbon capture and storage, CCS, can play a role here because existing and depleting gas and oil fields can be used to capturing CO2. And if CCS proves workable and there is a high cost for carbon removal in industrial countries, then oil and gas exporting countries could have a substantial comparative advantage in all kinds of energy-intensive industries. So it would be a win-win policies for oil and gas exporting countries and the global environment. Well, we can also look from another angle, not from an economical view, but from the political, the options that energy exports offer to the policymakers. One political objective to go downstream is the security of supply, which can counter unfavorable political circumstances like sanctions. We see that Iran, Russia, and Venezuela are examples of countries that want to have a sufficient supply of refined products to hedge against the negative effects of international sanctions. For instance, although Venezuela has the world's largest crude oil reserves, but Venezuela is suffering gasoline shortages due to the US sanctions on its oil sector. So it's better for them to go downstream activities. Regarding elites, a unique feature of many oil and gas exporting countries is that the price of refined products like gasoline are lower relative to industrial countries. And subsidies prices are offered to the population for non-productive and purely consumptive purposes. The explanation here is governments and elites use this offer to buy the support of local population. And this argument is confirmed by the example of Norway, in which a democratic government subject to re-election doesn't give any promises on fuel subsidies to their population. Also, in the industrial organization literature, it is discussed that politicians and managers are interested in the three big Ps: power, pay, and prestige. And well, having a huge infrastructure project would deliver all three Ps. For example, in terms of power, through the discretion to choose highly paid managers they can hire from the outside of the country, for example. In terms of pay, large-scale investments into the local exporting industry. In terms of prestige, it will always be connected to the individuals who initiated the project. And well, nevertheless, all such initiatives can be used by politicians at the end of the day to claim that they positively affected labor market. This figure compares gasoline prices in selected resource exporting countries to those in Europe and other oil exporting countries like Norway, the US, and Canada as cross-reference. Product prices in Norway refute the idea that the local population of an oil exporting country must receive refined products at subsidized prices. This suggests that the low refined product prices found in most resource exporting countries are hardly defendable on the normative argument that I talked about it. Instead, a substantial fraction of this discount is presumably used as a means to buy the current support of local population. There are a few national experiments that may explain or not whether resource exports stimulate the development of a downstream industry. Among the OECD countries, Norway, the UK, the Netherlands, and Canada give an insight into whether the downstream industry follows the upstream and how successful these strategies are. Neither the UK nor Canada entered the downstream business on a grand scale, despite the proximity of large markets that they have. The chemical industry in the Netherlands is located around the port of Rotterdam and is not dependent on gas from the Groningen gas field. So resource availability does not seem to stimulate local downstream activities. However, Norway and Russia began exporting refined products, as indicated in this figure, due to nearby export markets. So this figure provides a view of how refining as a share of oil production affects growth. It shows no positive correlation and even a somewhat negative correlation for a number of OPEC countries. The hypothesis that refining coupled with oil extraction delivers spillovers that foster development is under question now. Why is that? Because refining does not employ a large number of people, but investment into the refinery sector are huge. Well, here I talk about the role of CCS regarding the climate change and the advantages that can bring for oil and gas exporters. I don't go to the details again, but just to make it show, in spite of obvious comparative advantages that I said earlier, we found only a few indications of concrete projects in the Middle East countries after signing the Paris Agreement in 2015. In Saudi Arabia, in the ADNOC in Abu Dhabi, Iran's OMAC project, and Qatar Petroleum is also building a system for its project. Regarding political economic explanations, one of the strongest arguments for entering downstream industry is the political objective to ensure the security of domestic supply against the uncertainties of politics. Elites have a tendency to expand their dominance, and given the limitation of organic growth for companies, even in the national oil companies, CEOs are willing to buy other companies. So some decided to go downstream, not only for economic reasons, but to accrue size and importance. In conclusion, in this study, we reviewed normative and positive reasons why oil and gas exporting countries expand into downstream industries, and we compared these aspects against facts, including price differentiation, efficiency arguments from the industrial organization, and arguments based on fostering development, comparative advantage, hedging, climate change, and a few others. We found that local refining can serve as a partial hedge against the vagaries of the oil price. Refining domestic and regional markets can be economical, and even local subsidies here can be justified to some extent for some of the Middle East countries. However, all of those justifications seem to be mismanaged politically by granting the national oil companies a monopoly and by very large subsidies on refined products. Instead, current downstream activities serve rather political and managerial than economic objectives. Thank you very much.
Hussein, thank you so much for the presentation. We already do have one question in the chat from Quentin.
Yeah, thank you, Hussein, for your presentation. Very interesting. Could you go back to slide 10? So I'm not sure I understand this point of with the climate change policies. I mean, do you consider it as a reason toward justifying vertical integration?
Well, what we say that due to the climate change and the opportunities that these oil and gas countries have, because they are exporter of oil and gas, so they have a depleted field. And by the technology that is coming, like CCS, CCUS, they can defend the production of the climate agenda as well. Because now we are under the attack somehow by the climate change, by many countries, many organizations. Recently, IAEA published the net zero emissions. Many are talking about the net zero emissions. Also, we are developing actually about these scenarios. But what we say that if we are expanding, the country is expanding the technology and going to the and going through these policy interactions with other organizations, so they can argue that, yes, we have this opportunity, we can produce, and we can emit our emissions by carbon capture and storage, for example. And then this is a argument that they said that, okay, we are producing and we are going downstream, we can produce the petrochemical, we can go to produce the gasoline, because you see that gasoline, for example, they said that about talking about the electric vehicles, why we have gasoline, why we have diesel. So they can say they can use this argument as a supporting.
I mean, but no, I'm not sure I get it, because if you are carbon capture and storage, this won't reduce emissions from your gasoline vehicles and things like that.
No. For the production,
For the
when
production,
for the production, you capture the CO2, okay, right?
okay.
And then for the final products that you have the gasoline or diesel, you can argue that, okay, already this one is carbon neutral. And
Wow.
response to the final products. For example, in case of LNG, now we have green LNG. What is green LNG? The LNG that offsets. So they can say that they can argue that either they use the electrification in the process, they can argue that they use the carbon capture and storage, that in case of Novatek, for example, we have, in case of Qatar, we have, or I don't know if I want to give you the final products, ammonia, the blue ammonia. Blue ammonia, what is blue ammonia? Ammonia now is used in the power generation sectors, in the maritime transport sector. But what is blue ammonia? The ammonia that came from the hydrogen of byproduct of from the natural gas. What is a byproduct of hydrogen? But what? From the carbon capture and storage. It's not green. Green is electrolyzed. Blue is from the natural gas. So they can argue this.
Yeah, but I guess it would be only at midterm, you know, because you take the example of blue hydrogen, and but you know it reduces emissions, but it doesn't cut them as much as green hydrogen, for
Well,
instance.
yeah, but at the end of the day, it depends on the price. You know that we don't have green hydrogen really at the moment. There is no green hydrogen. All is gray. At the moment, all is gray even. It's not.
Yeah, of course, but I guess
that's blue.
Okay, so maybe a question. Taking this angle, my question would be: do you think that the higher carbon price increase incentives for vertical integration?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Because with higher carbon price, yeah, we have it in the paper. We mentioned this point exactly. Yes, we mentioned that higher carbon price is incentives. If there is a high carbon price and CCS combined with CCS, then there is incentives. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good comment. Thank you.
Thanks to both of you. We still have a couple of minutes for questions to Hussein. Do we have any further questions, comments?
Well, we don't have any more questions in the chat. So if anyone wants to take the mic.
Hi, I actually would like to make a comment and ask questions to Hussein. Thank you very much for your presentation. So I just wonder in the paper if you are planning to cover, because when we think of downstream investments entering downstream for the gas exporting countries, and in the recent years, when we think of like 5-6 years ago, oil price crisis, or even before, for example, the European oil and gas companies were struggling with the fixed costs of refineries.
Mm-hmm.
And it was difficult to hedge during those periods. And how do you see in future? Now we have the COVID pandemic, different changes, markets full of uncertainties. And is this considered that entering downstream could be also very costly when we think of fixed cost of refineries?
Yeah, well, you see, there are some points that you also have to mention. First of all, everything is not dependent on oil and gas prices in national oil companies. Why? Because everything is subsidized, and many of these national oil companies are not profitable, and they have the support of the government. And you see that when the oil price is low, the gasoline price, the final products has the same price when the oil price is high. But you see that in case of US, in OECD countries, in Europe, when the price is high, they pay higher. When the price is low, also they pay higher. They don't change the marginal cost of the final products because of the tax and other things that they have. This is first. And second, what I wanted to mention is that we are focusing on the many countries, and in many countries the large share of the GDP in these countries is oil and gas. So they, I don't know, maybe above 70%, 80% of the GDP. So they are highly dependent on this, and they cannot stop producing because oil prices are low. But what you mentioned about COVID, we also think that maybe it's a good idea that we consider the effects of COVID in the paper. Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be a very good point.
Yeah, it's a good argument, actually. Yeah, we submit a paper also to Energy Policy Journal, and we received from one referee why you didn't consider the effect of COVID. But it was submitted actually in 2019, and then COVID came in 2020.
Sure.
So we have to apply it again, maybe, and then we submit. Yeah, it's a good point.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, unless there are any further questions or remarks, once again, Hussein, thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you too. So I stop sharing because next presenter wants to.
So just for the participants of the session who are slightly confused in case you came later, we switched presentation 2 and 3, which means that we now move to the presentation that was initially planned to be as a second presentation. It's now going to be our third contribution today. We actually stay in the refinery business and we move to presentation number 3, who refines oil and while disentangling investment decisions from countries and companies. I also see that this is going to give you a lot of opportunities for the Q&A later, that every single co-author is present. Quentin Hoarau, I give you the the stage is yours. Looking forward to your presentation.
Quentin, we cannot hear you. Is your mic activated?
Indeed, sorry.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, I'm sharing.
Yeah, camera working, voice working, and share is working too.
Great, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Dawud, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to present you a very preliminary analysis about the determinant of refining worldwide. So to be honest, I'm pretty much a newbie in the oil and gas industry. It's much more my co-author Olivier MASSOL, which is here, which is very competent on those topics. So what we wanted to do in this paper was to analyze from an empirical point of view the determinant of oil refining. So for that, I'm very glad that I attended Hussein's presentation, because I think it's very complementary. So one main difference between this presentation and Hussein's is that we do not limit ourselves to oil producing countries. So a little bit of background. So refining worldwide is an industry with a value added of $200 billion. It's still a growing sector, as you can see on this slide below. Even though it doesn't look like there is much happening in this industry, and it's and for instance, it mainly deals with internal reconfiguration, with change of ownership and things like that. So here on this this right figure, you have the annual change in roughly distillation that shows you that new refining capacities are still being added every year. So this So this industry is very competitive. So we can count around 700, 600, 700 refining plants worldwide over a large set of segments, for instance, such as gasoline or methanol or more exotic petrochemical products. So what we want to do in this paper is to understand the reason of why countries are developing refining. So it's really a country-based approach. And for that, so this question starts from the relation that there is a large diversity of cases. For instance, we have some resource-rich countries, so oil producing countries that have developed very large-scale export-oriented facilities. Or we are other, so for instance, Saudi Arabia. Or we have other countries that seem to overlook downstream activities, such as Norway. We have also countries that do not have.
Sorry to interrupt. We have issues with your mic. Maybe try to speak a little slower or something.
Okay. Is it better?
It's better.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I'll just go on. We have also countries that do not have any oil in their soil, that are importing crude oil, but still that have a very large refining industry. So what we want to do in this paper is to classify and to understand the different motivations for refining. So in this literature, we could not find relevant empirical analysis for answering such questions. So even though, to be honest, I haven't, I was not aware about a bunch of the literature that Hussein talked about. So I will have to check that. But beyond refining, we could find a small list of motivation in non-refining, let's say, literature. So first, for instance, it could be for which resource rich is a country, it could be the ambition to export processed products instead of raw material. So this strategy, known as resource-based industrialization, is have been said to be a way to avoid resource curse and the Netherlands disease. So this resource-based industrialization is indeed expected to trigger knowledge spillovers and also to provide diversification in exports. I mean, the problem with such strategies is that refining are very capital intensive. Moreover, such sector requires skilled laborers. So basically, we say that such strategy is not for every country. Moreover, we find product as the output a complex value chain, and managing that situation is reputed to be more complex than only crude oil production and export. Another reason would be that for resource-poor nations, refining could be an instrument for an import substitution strategy. And such strategy is basically motivated by the willingness to develop a security of supply for transport fuels or other chemical products. Another reason would be that as crude and refined products are internationally traded commodities, there have been explanations from international economics towards the possible determinants, which could include a natural factor endowment for some countries, which would drive specialization in refinings. And there are also other explanations, such as arguments based on economies of scales and vertical integration, such as an hedging strategy. So what we want to do in this paper is to understand what are the determinants of refining for countries, and more specifically, what we really want to understand is which purpose serves refining. I mean, and if I precise this question, it would be: would an additional refining capacity be targeted towards export or import? Meaning that does capacity increase export or lower imports? What we really want to emphasize is the role of ownership of refinings. I mean, there are worldwide, approximately half of the refinings are from public actors, and the other half is from private actors. So we wanted to understand how such difference is reflected on the refining strategy. And finally, we wanted to understand what was the specificity with oil producing countries. So this part will probably overlap with Hussein's, but by providing empirical arguments. So our methodology is that we develop an empirical ex-post study based on a panel of countries. So from 1991 to 2018, we use data from the Oil and Gas Journal for information on the on refineries, data from IAEA for the flows of oil products and crude oil between countries, and some data from the World Bank for GDP, for GDP and other relevant economic economic aspect. So here. So okay, here I detail the data. So to be more precise, the data from the oil and gas we present from the Oil and Gas Journal. We present the annual inventory of world refineries. So it's basically the list of every refinery worldwide with its capacity and basically its specialization towards the different set of petroleum products. Our contribution in terms of data was to add characteristic on the owner of refineries. So basically, from 1991 to 2018, we had like something like 1,000 companies, and for each of those companies, we search what kind of a company it was, and to do that, we develop a quick typology of companies, which would be characterized between whether the company is a national, so a NOC, or it is a big oil company, needs from Europe, US. Is it a small independent company, meaning that it would only own one refinery? Is the one refinery owned by an industrial conglomerate, such as I don't know, Bayer in Germany, or is it a joint venture between between two kinds of company previously defined? So to limit to a much simpler in the first step, because this is still preliminary. So we define public companies as only NOC or joint venture between two NOCs inside one country, and a private company, all the other kinds, even joint ventures between a national company and a private company, for instance. So I mean, this can be a debate, and this can be debated, and we'll do maybe more work on that. So our empirical strategy consists in, I mean, here I'm going to present you 4 regressions. Maybe Dawud, can you say me how much time I have left? I didn't take.
You can still go for another 10. Oh, you still have plenty of time.
Okay, that's nice. Thank you, Dawud. Okay, so our empirical strategy aims at answering 4 sub-questions. The first one is a very basic one. It's just what are the determinants of refining for countries, meaning that what explains the fact that a country refines or not. So to do that, we develop a panel logit regression using covariates such as economic or geographic things. Second, we try to answer the question: which purpose serves refining in terms of export or imports? So to do that, we achieve 2 panel regressions on the level of each country's export and import. So and we use the explanatory variables that are the refining capacity and the oil product consumption. So regression 3 tries to disentangle the result of regression 2 between private and public actors, using the classifications that I detailed previously. And finally, regression 4 is the same as regression 3, with this time another disentanglement using a dummy for whether or not the country produces oil. Okay, so our first regression, which targets the driver of refining, gives pretty obvious results. So what we wanted to do is just to look at which kind of countries would evolve. So basically, what we find is that expectedly refining happens in which countries, as we can see with correlation with log of GPA per capita, or if it is an oil producer. Here, what we add is also some kind of measures on trade openness, or the importance of trade in the economy of the country. So what we see here is indeed, it seems that refining is favored in countries that are very open to commerce. Okay, more interesting and more central in our analysis are the next three regressions. So here I present two regressions. One where that are a panel regression with fixed effect. One that tries to explain export of oil products with the producing capacity at the national scales and the national oil product consumption. So this second is used to control basically by countries that are big consumer that are to control by big countries basically. So what we see here is that we have a positive correlation between export and processing capacity, and an insignificant correlation between imports and producing capacity. So this can be said differently. This seems to indicate that a marginal increase in capacity induces an increase of export, but does not do anything on imports. So this first question seems to give an answer to our first question, which was why country refined? Is it is it an export strategy, or is it a strategy that targets energy security, or for instance by substituting imports? So here we do not see any evidence toward this substitution of import argument. So what is interesting is to disentangle this effect between between the type of owner of the refinery. So here we separate processing capacity between public and private, and what we see is fairly interesting to me. So we still have a positive correlation between export and processing capacity, but it's much higher for private. Also, we see that we do have a substitution import substitution effect with with an increase of public crude oil processing capacity. What is also interesting is that we have a positive effect of processing capacity with imports. So this effect could be could be analyzed, such as basically when you add a more basically private processing capacity could induce a change of specialization of oil refining activities, which would reduce the potential of producing oil produce that would be destined towards the interior market. And this would lead to an increase of imports because they would need to fill the gap. So there would be a redistribution between part of the production toward exports. I mean, anyway, this is only an hypothesis, and we plan on go deeper on this issue by looking at the different specialization of oil refining, which is data available in our in the data in the database of the Oil and Gas Journal. Finally, we wanted to understand how specific are oil producers. So to do that, we use again our dummy of whether or not a country is producing oil at the time t. And what we see here is we find so what we find here is that we still have a positive correlation with exports. But for oil producers, we still have positive correlation with exports. We no longer have a negative correlation for public capacity. But what happens is this the negative correlation that we would find in regression 3 happens only with oil producing countries. So this is basically what this indicates is that public companies, if they do refining, are trying to substitute imports of oil products only in oil producer company, and it doesn't happen on countries that do not refine. Also, what we find is that both in private companies or in public companies, inside oil producing countries, the correlation between capacity and export is slightly reduced. So this, which is quite logical, because it indicates that in the end, oil producing countries, whether their refineries are public or private, mitigates a little the strategy towards exports to favor more their interior market by substituting imports. So so this goes along with all the arguments that have been given, such as the possibility of refining to be a hedging strategy. Okay, so now it's time for our conclusion. So as I've said in the beginning, those results are very preliminary. To be honest, they have 1 day old. As we finally agree on the regression presented yesterday. But still, I think that this empirical analysis is promising and can give arguments to a bunch of reasons that have been given in the literature for refining, and more importantly, to discriminate between these reasons. So, hence, in this preliminary work, we have collected and provided data on the information of the ownership of refining plants. This was very tedious. We provide an up-to-date analysis of the determinant of why a country refines, and we investigated on the impact of the ownership structure on these strategies. So our key takeaways is that obviously refining happens in rich countries and in oil producing countries. Openness to trade is another factor. At the aggregate level, refining seems to serve export strategies without inducing import substitutions. But in fact, it's more it's private refining, which is much more driven towards export than public. And in oil producing countries, public refining induce an import substitution. And exports are lowered. Okay, so I think that's it for me. Thank you a lot for your attention.
Quentin, thank you so much for your presentation. I assume that we do have some questions from the audience.
Well, on the chat, there's no question or comments, so feel free to use your mic to ask question.
Maybe from the previous presenters, do you have anything? So we still do have some 10 minutes in case you do have anything.
Hi. So maybe Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So congratulations, first of all, very interesting. So I think we have a very nice session, one upstream to downstream topic. And I would like to just comment of the time frame and for your analysis, just as an idea, is that because if I'm not mistaken, if I catch it right, it's between 1986 till 2018.
Yeah.
I think the incentives to invest in downstream over time is also changing when we look at the global, especially for the European countries. That would be interesting to somehow to control this time frame and look for some period and after. Maybe then you could find different behavior of the decision of investments of downstream.
You mean? Do you think the reason of investing in refining is different in the 19s than in the 2010s?
Yeah, I think especially for the last decade, it should be different. My expectation would be different because I'm just thinking from my data set, when we think of, let's say, that M&A investment strategy, and we really see this strong increase in upstream, and for the last decade, especially a decrease of the downstream. But this is like, of course, for some countries, but you could also somehow look for different time frame and different group of countries, then maybe you will see. And then you can very nicely use this institutional factors argument, because then you will have you will most probably observe some countries, more investments in downstream, some less, and then you could connect all this. Just as an idea, because all this like politics, sanction, energy security, transaction cost, property rights, stable politics, government acts, this would be all like economic aspects and the supply and demand balance. So then you could very nicely use all these arguments. Because why, for example, in our paper case, in terms of just M&A, I'm telling that, of course, the property rights in the US is a very special case. So you could have a private ownership. But if you look at like some other countries, which is highly driven by the national oil and gas companies. So of course, in those countries, for example, it's highly expected that you will see less investments. So such arguments, if you just apply some control on the time frame, that's just an idea, right? So I'm also not an expert, but it's just some.
I mean, it's definitely easy to do. So I think we'll check that indeed. But I think also. I mean, maybe what changed, is that there have been many companies that have been privatized during the time frames that we are looking.
Yes,
so in our data is, it appears as an increase of private capacity and a decrease in public capacity. I think this, because you've seen my first graph. You have basically flat investment in the US, in Europe. But only in Asia it increased a lot. But I think that what changes in this country is the change of ownership, and so that's what we are looking at actually. So by doing that, so in a way, I think this captures also time effect and period. So I guess we can still. Maybe a last comment that I have on your question is maybe that the behavior of national companies is not the same in the 18s. 30 years ago than it is now. This is probably, and it's true that our data does not capture that for now. But it's also a problem, because as we want to work on the country level, then it gets very difficult to add so many different type of firms, how they evolve in time. So maybe adding time controls, maybe an elegant way to do that.
Thank you. But thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, thanks for all your comments.
Thanks to both of you. Do we have further questions?
Sorry, maybe if I can ask a question to you, Franz. Thanks again for the presentation. It's more like a general question. It's about your very end, the very end of your conclusion. You are talking about the potential of the refining industry as a driver or not, let's say, of carbon leakage. So my question is basically how do you think the refining industry can be impacted by climate regulation? It's about new.
Well, just because I mean, refining is a carbon-intensive industry, and leakage is basically it says that if you apply a stringent environmental regulation, then it gives incentive for the activity to move away from the country. Basically is that. So to be honest, we have not really investigated this part yet. This is much more longer term goal.
Okay.
But thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Okay, in that case, that probably concludes our wonderful morning session on ownership and firm structure in the oil sector. We've had 3 wonderful presentations, one focusing on the upstream business, 2 focusing on downstream. To author presenters, Hussein, Sevkat, Quentin, thank you so much again. And obviously also thank you to the audience for being here this morning at this quite early appointment. If there's nothing else, then yeah, that concludes the session. Thank you so much again. And I wish you all a pleasant conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Bye.